Hi, and welcome to my breakdown of the patch 2.4 changes that are coming with the second wave of updates. Now, while I covered all of this on my live stream over at twitch.tv/macrobioboy, I'm going to try to give you the too long didn't watch edition of this. Everybody's going to be putting out their own reviews, but I'm going to take everything that we talked about in stream and distill it down to the key takeaways so that you understand the impact of each one of these changes and what builds might be impacted by it. First thing to note is that these PTR changes are going live on the multiplayer servers on March 2nd, so that's in 2 days or 1.5 days if you're overseas or across the pond. This is looking to test ladder functionality, and it does look like obviously they'll be supporting single player, but they're really hoping that people will get in, check out the new functionality for game decisions, try out controller support, and also check out that the ladder is actually marking things as it should. Really important to note that the newest PTR patch will allow characters to get moved into a special folder that is now linked up to 2.4. If you take this character file and just move it into the new folder, while you'll be able to see the updates, this character will now be configured for 2.4. So you won't be able to access them back on 2.3. So I recommend taking your single player file and just copy all of that, move it onto your desktop. So if you do end up messing around with anything, you still have that original copy so you don't get screwed. This is probably the most important part here. They're talking about the fact that ladder characters, when they rotate to non-ladder or post-season, their ladder exclusive items will also roll over. All of this is going to go into some kind of ladder specific stash tab they're able to take items out of. And then once we move into the next season over, it will eventually expire. So you want to be able to take all of your items out of there so that you have them available on your non-ladder characters. And they're using this term exclusive again, which hints at the fact that at least some of the things coming in this patch and potentially future patches will be exclusive to ladder until that ladder season rotates. So it looks like a massive change is coming to how DClone is going to be summoned. So World Event Diablo or Diablo Clone used to summon according to an IP address. So if we were both on North America, but I was on server number 3 and you were on server number 5, if I triggered DClone, you wouldn't get one. Now, regardless of what server we're on, as long as we're both in North America, both in Europe, or both in Asia, if I hit the progression so that we get to sell or trigger a DClone, you'll get one as well. You won't have to be in those special Discord elite groups to get a chance at getting a DClone. People will still have to generally save up SOJs together, and I think this will just make it easier for the community to work together as a whole. And it just so happens that you might be messing around, see the message, and all of a sudden DClone's in your game, and you didn't even have to hunt down any IP addresses. To help with this, they're adding a new command, /Diablo, and this is going to show you the progression according to your current. Maybe you just start up every morning, you check each region, see if any of them are close, and then play games in that region until somebody inevitably sells enough or somebody does a DClone walk, and then you get your Annie as well. This is going to change the market, obviously, but I think it's going to open up Annihilus charms for a vast majority of the population who never got one at any point or never really had an opportunity to get one because they just didn't have time to play and hang out in secret discords and get into like the deep parts of the community to have a chance at it. For Amazon, basically they're making the physical Jabazon better, and they're also making physical Boazon a lot better. So Impale is going to be about 4 frames faster, meaning you're going to get down to about a 10 frame attack for Impale, which is really nice because you use that on bosses. Plague Javelin looks like it's no longer going to be a set 3-second duration, but they're overall making it so that you're going to see more DPS. So it doesn't really matter how long the poison lasts as long as the damage per second is there and is powerful, but we'll need to test this. Multi-shot, strafe, and guided arrow are all now going to synergize with one another. So multi-shot and guided arrow are now going to gain 12% increased damage. That's 240 off weapon ED if you max out both skills, and that gives it to each other. And strafe is actually going to benefit from both of them. So strafe is going to see an increase of 300 off weapon enhanced damage if you max out its synergies, and that's on top of the fact that strafe now deals 100% of weapon damage. So strafe is going to be a much more powerful early game option because you're going to have so much more power on the skill, and it's going to translate into late game very well. Whereas multi-shot is going to feel better in the early game in general, but is definitely going to start excelling in that late game. So whether you're multi-shot, strafe, or a hybrid between the two, your physical Boazon is going to feel really good walking into this season. They also reduced the cooldown on Immolation Arrow. This means it's going to be about 0.6 seconds instead of the 1 second cooldown. The Assassin is getting bonus attack rating on Blade Fury, which it desperately needed. The patch says 10%. I think it's 10% per skill level. So if you max it out with hard points, you're going to get 200 attack rating. Roughly, we have to guess at this point. I honestly think that it could use more, but getting any at all is a massive boost since you really didn't have any sources of percentile attack rating on the skill at all. With the Barbarian, we're getting our first instance of melee splash in Diablo 2 Resurrected. So if you ever played Project Diablo 2, leap attack dealt damage in an area around it by making an attack on every character. The way that this is worded, it sounds like leap attack as a skill function is going to apply physical damage around it in an area. So it's not completely clear whether or not we're getting an extra attack against every target within the radius, or the weapon damage of the primary attack is being applied around it, or the skill itself when landing is going to apply some percentage of weapon damage or skill damage. But either way, leap attack was already very good. We were able to bring it into players 8 chaos and do seal popping in under 3 minutes, including killing Diablo. And now having AoE on the skill itself means that even if you happen to miss, potentially you're still doing damage all around the target, or you're able to handle multiple targets and send them into hit recovery, so you're not as fragile and out in the open once you jump in. In addition to that, they look like they're just making leap and leap attack less janky, more consistent, easier to navigate, and not look as hilarious as it used to look. They also snuck in the fact that each skill is going to have a minimum jump height, which could potentially be a nerf to really high level support barbarians spamming short hop leaps, which is a massive strategy in any 8-player comp. Two big changes, so I'll gloss over everything else. Every one of the weapon masteries is going to gain additional attack rating on base. Lower level characters are going to feel better, and you're going to get more bang for your buck on higher levels. Sword Mastery is now Blade Mastery, and it will also apply to daggers, so we can finally have that dual Flesh Ripper dream of a barbarian running around at max speed dagger attack. Much bigger, Throwing Mastery has two major changes. A, on the skill, it is going to have a chance to not use quantity when thrown up to 50%. And then B, if you were to critically strike with a thrown weapon, you will regain quantity. So based off the way that this is currently phrased, I don't think that Deadly Strike is going to be included here. It's only critical strikes triggered by the Throwing Mastery itself. But that being said, considering with 100% Pierce, your projectile can hit up to 5 targets, I assume that if you were to land a critical strike on any one of those targets, you are going to replenish a quantity. So you actually have the potential of going net positive per attack if you manage to hit every single target, or at the very least have 5 times the chances to not lose a quantity, meaning you can effectively throw your weapons forever as long as you're successfully hitting targets. These two changes, when put hand in hand with the fact that they're also increasing quantity across the board for throwing weapons, just means that Throwing Mastery might be completely legitimate as a narrow cast short range AoE build without having to dip into Frenzy or any of the hybrid versions of the build. Druid changes are massive, so I'm going to try to simplify them. The biggest thing here that I see from Armageddon is that they were willing to remove the prerequisite from the cold side of the elemental tree. So Armageddon used to attach to Hurricane, which meant you had to get Cyclone Armor, Arctic Blast, Tornado, Twister, and Hurricane to be able to get to Armageddon. That was 5 skill points that you were never going to get back for skills you couldn't use. Now, though, it no longer does. And the reason why this is so important is because it's setting a precedent where other skill trees might be physically manipulated so that their skill point allocation is better or more reasonable, or you're not being punished for trying to build out more interesting hybrid builds. This thing can go a long way across every single character to free up a handful of points that were otherwise going into skills that were completely useless. And at the end of the day, being able to free up more skill points is something that legitimately fosters build diversity and more willingness to hybridize and test out different types of meta builds. In addition to that, Armageddon is getting a wider radius and is also getting a roughly 33% increase in projectiles thrown per second. So you're going to be dealing more damage in a wider effect, and you're going to have more skill points for synergies in other parts of your build. The Summoning Druid gets to summon every single one of its summon types down the middle tree. So that means that you get to have dire wolves, spirit wolves, and a bear. Now, while this doesn't magically transform you into a summon necromancer, since they have at will amplified damage and corpse explosion, it does mean that you now have access to massive physical damage as well as massive cold damage, and your Heart of the Wolverines and any sources of fanaticism, concentration, or might aura is targeting a lot more of your team. You're getting a lot more bang for your buck for investing into aura heavy compositions. All in all, the Summon Druid is now pretty much fully unlocked as a very viable meta for elite sniping, boss killing, and small density clear. The Werewolf and the Werebear are now going to use the new attack speed. So that was the newest attack speed calculation that was put into the original patch 2.4, which at first slowed down these builds, but their max increased attack speed cap is being doubled. So it's from 75 to 150. What this basically means is that you're going to go from a max attack frame of 10 frames down to anywhere between 6 to 4, depending on how exactly this gets implemented. So your werewolf is technically going to be faster in the early game and also faster in the late game. On top of the fact that they're also decreasing the animation length for the middle attacks of Fury. So while your first and last attack are still going to be their normal frame rate, the attacks in the middle are going to be much faster. This is going to decrease the chances of you getting put into hit recovery and interrupted, since you'll be landing attacks faster than your opponents would be. On top of that, while the Werebear isn't seeing as drastic of a speed increase, they are gaining a massive amount of attack damage on their skills, defense and defense scaling, and now they have the caveat of they cannot be interrupted while attacking or using skills. Add on to the fact that Maul now has a plus 3% attack speed per charge bonus. Your Werebear isn't going to be as fast as it was before, but now it can't be interrupted. So before, where you were like massive tank, you could probably shift click strength now and go with a huge damage option on a Maul Bear, or get that huge Maul attack speed increase and then go for a really fast uninterruptible Fireclaw Werebear and absolutely smash everything around you. It seems like Werewolf is going to be the go-to for applying Crushing Blow, and Werebear is going to be the go-to for applying raw DPS against targets where Crushing Blow wouldn't be a huge help. Necromancer, they're slightly bumping up the damage and making it easier to cast both Blood Golem and Fire Golem, although Fire Golem's Fire Aura is going to be returned to level 1 Holy Fire per level, as opposed to 2 levels per skill level. Paladins are seeing a slight reversion to Thorns, so it looks like the skill is both going to return a flat amount of damage as well as returning a percentile amount of damage, which was one of the biggest concerns when they swapped over how Thorns was working. So now it's going to be, even if a monster misses you or if you block, you're still going to trigger Thorns damage, but it's going to be returning that flat amount and also a percentile of the damage that would have been dealt. This lets you abuse a lot of in-game mechanics, but realistically, it's only relevant to people like me who like the pacifist, so I won't bore you with those specifics. All of your radial damage auras are getting that area damage increase again, but they're fine-tuning how it works. So they're adding an increase to the radial tick damage, so that every 2 seconds that pop damage that was happening, but it's only going to be doubled if monsters are within melee range. So it doesn't look like it's going to be tied to the radius of the skill anymore. So your Hand of Justice, Dual Dragon setup isn't going to be melting things at the edge of the screen, but if you get in close and personal, you are going to see that immediate pop on these targets. So this means that something like the Dual Aura Sorceress is going to be able to abuse this. Your melee Zealadins are finally going to be able to get the benefit that the team originally envisioned. And then on top of that, Holy Fire is seeing an additional synergy buff. So an additional 60% skill damage on top of what they had previously. Easily the biggest change coming to the Paladin is that Holy Bolt and Fist of Heavens are now going to work on demons. So the only thing holding back Fist of Heavens from, I think, absolutely trouncing Blessed Hammer at this point was the fact that realistically the massive damage that you were doing was only really applicable to undead targets, and on demons and other types of targets like beasts or humans or anything that doesn't have a tag, while Fist of Heavens was doing decent damage, it wasn't fast enough to really compete. Now Fist of Heavens blows up demons, and just keep in mind that every act boss is also a demon. So when you cast Fist of Heavens on it, the Holy Bolt damage that comes out of it is also going to hurt all act bosses. And on top of that, rather than using Fist of Heavens, you can easily just go at max FCR breakpoint Holy Bolt, dump 10k magic damage, which pierces through demons for any area where Fist of Heavens would be slower. All in all, I think that Fist of Heavens is now absolutely a number one contender versus Hammerdin. It also excels in a lot of areas where Hammerdin is very restricted, something like Ancient Tunnels or any of the new area level 5 places. And then on top of that, it's able to do it at max range and break all of its immunes with the fact that you're running max level Conviction. It's just a powerhouse. I'm personally looking forward to patch 2.4 and the rise of the Fist of Heavens Paladin. Let me know if you think I'm blowing this out of proportion, but honestly, we need to test this because it's going to be bananas. Sorceress is getting the least amount of changes. They're reducing the initial cost of Nova by 2 mana. That's it. It costs 2 less mana on level 1. Act 1 mercenaries are now able to use Amazon-specific bows, as well as gaining +2 Amazon skills. So while this doesn't talk about any of the staff mods that you could get, or plus to bow and crossbow, we at least know that plus Amazon skill, the stat line, will now help. I think this is a slight nerf to the Act 3 Mercenary. Frozen armor being replaced with chilling armor means that when they're hit, they're not going to freeze targets, they're just going to chill them and return a little bit of damage. But they really don't want to get hit anyways and they run away from monsters. I'd rather them have frozen armor, but I'm willing to see what it looks like. Maybe it has a really high level chill armor. Who knows? But yeah. Act 5 Mercenary, this is also massive. So they're also able to gain +2 Barbarian skills. Now, if they're able to gain staff mods like from Primal Helms, plus to combat and masteries like on Unbending Will, this would be a huge, huge change, but we got to see what it looks like when you start swapping these items onto them. They have also added a new mercenary to this game. So Act 5 Mercenary now has a Frenzy alternative. This merc is going to cast Frenzy, Taunt, and also has access to Iron Skin for more defense. And it looks like you're going to be able to use dual wield one-handed swords. So there's a lot to unpack here. The first thing is the ×2 minimum and maximum damage on the regular mercenary bug going to be available here as well? If so, how is it that they're reproducing this? They had to code a completely new mercenary to do this. So I wouldn't be surprised if the original mercenaries code is going to be changed on top of adding this one, and we might see that removal of that ×2 damage. So we'll have to test that out. Then, while they specifically talk about two-handed swords here, they don't mention what kind of weapons the Frenzy Barb can use. I assume that it is swords. If it's not, using something like a Last Wish and a Beast so that your merc is carrying 2 auras, and then you can carry the Pride on you, means that you have a merc that actually deals damage. And then on all of your summoning builds, all of your wolves and bears and skeletons and revives are going to have access to all 3 auras, which is absolutely banana. Outside of that, dual wielding weapons, probably the best options are going to be something like dual grief, dual ethereal head striker, dual breath of the dying, dual lawbringer for a massive amount of chance to cast decrepify, dual plague for that lower resist proc for poison builds and people who don't have access to infinity yet, dual crescent moon for static. Honestly, the combinations are nearly endless, and I think that this one mercenary change might make it so that we finally have a higher DPS option than something like the Act 2 Might Merc. And on top of that is going to enable a lot of builds in very unique and interesting ways. So I can't wait to see what all the theory crafting leads to for what ends up being the best version of this. For Runewords, Plague is now going to be able to be built in claws and daggers. So you're finally going to be able to build dual Plague Claw for your traps then to have +10 to traps before you're able to buy those Super GG +6 with 40 IAS from Anya. Plague in a Claw is also a really nice offhand option for something like the Whirlwind Sin. I don't really know how you're going to use this inside of a dagger, but it's just cool. And the other big change here is that Infinity, Obedience, and Pride can now be built in spears and Amazon spears. So first off, Amazon Spear Infinity allows you to build out your Charge Strike and Chain Lightning builds and have probably the best weapon on that. In addition to that, there are a lot of really good spear options for an Act 2 Mercenary for Infinity, and some of them have much higher increased attack speed. Something like an Ethereal Man Catcher will be able to apply that crushing blow a lot faster than even the next fastest polearm. Obedience in any of the Amazon spears, or just spears in general, is a huge damage option. Obedience Warpike comes to mind. But on top of that, the physical Amazon using a spear really didn't have any options other than Han Sundan and Ethereal Breath of the Dying. Being able to build an Obedience now really helps to bridge that gap and make physical Fenzon a lot more viable. They say that they're increasing unique density or increasing the number of unique packs, so elite mobs like champions and uniques, inside of the new area level 85 areas. So if that's the case and it really is across the board, some of the places that you should look out for are all of the temples in Act 3. Having additional boss groups would be absolutely nuts though, considering you can hit all of them in rapid fire. Arachnid Lair having additional boss groups would be absolutely astounding. In Stony Tomb, which was already fine and had a plethora of boss groups since you always had at least two permanent boss groups, creeping feature in the topmost layer, and then you always have a boss group over at the gold chest, will mean that these areas will like vastly outperform any of the other area level 85 places, considering how easy it is to get to them. On top of that, maybe adding additional density to the portals in Act 5 mean that you might be willing to farm there. But think about the Icy Cellar in particular. Having additional boss groups in such a confined space will make any build that can blow up the screen incredibly efficient. Now, while there are a lot of general and miscellaneous updates, I would just like to point out the fact that they say that they've increased AI for pets, summons, and mercenaries. And then on top of that, the mercenary UIs are going to be more intuitive and let you know when they do or do not have access to the skills, especially when you get rushed and you end up buying a mercenary that's very low level who doesn't have access to a skill that you think that it should. A lot of things in here as well is optimization for console and better controller support. So anybody who has been playing those in particular, I recommend checking out these each individually so you have a better idea of what to expect as far as functionality. But all in all, they are seriously putting a lot of time and effort into that console and controller support as well as accessibility options. And I like to see the fact that that outcry from the community is being answered and the team's taking it seriously. There are a lot of general bug fixes, and I'm going to point out just a few of them, the things that I think are probably the most important. And that is obviously that sacrifice will now hit moving targets. All right, I can't take that one seriously. For speedrunners, this is really important. Sacrifice just for some reason didn't hit monsters sometimes. It was really difficult to determine why. And it turns out it just couldn't hit monsters while they were moving some of the time. So now that's fixed. Again, only important to speedrunners, but this is like a 20-year-old bug that nobody really recognized or really pointed out that we would cry out for all the time, almost as a joke. It looks like skills will no longer be interrupted by player dodge, avoids, or blocks. This wasn't a bug as far as I was understanding it. This was definitely how the game should work. But if your skill use can't be interrupted by dodging or blocking, you're going to much more consistently be able to handle situations and get out of areas where otherwise you would have been tripped up. And B, hardcore players need to get used to the fact that they're not going to get interrupted with potentially life-saving dodges and blocks. So be wary out there and get used to how this is going to feel in game. Fixing an issue where bindings for O skills don't persist if you die or leave the game is actually really, really important. So like putting teleport on a keybind from an item that was giving you it from an O skill, when you would die and leave game, you would have to rebind that skill. So something like teleport. And now it looks like you won't have to. Hopefully this also works for items with charges like lower resist and teleport stabs, just so that in that earlier game part, you're not consistently having to rebind these skills that you're using every game. Lord Desace's seal will now consistently activate when you press it. So you won't have to teleport or leap away and then jump back in. It looks like it should be working every time that you click it, which is honestly a massive godsend. This is another problem that's just been there forever, and we've all just had to deal with it. So I'm glad they're finally addressing it. Something that was probably pretty difficult for us to notice was the fact that apparently multi-targeting and sequence and rollback skills were missing when attacking moving targets. So it looks like Fend, Fury, Sacrifice, and Zeal are all now going to hit more consistently against targets that were moving. So we're probably going to see just overall better gameplay and more consistent damage output. And we were probably working with a much more hindered and less effective version of these builds without really noticing it. Something that was very interesting is that replenish quantity on items would not work if they were used for melee attacks and broke the last quantity on the item. So you could actually brick something like an Ethereal Titans. And it looks like they fixed that here. So while we'll have to test it, you'll be able to more easily and without having to be afraid of breaking it, use your ethereal weapons with replenished quantity for melee attacks and still keep them even after they get broken by that. And that's it, honestly. So here are the steps that they put up for how to participate in the PTR. If you haven't seen it already, your PTR should have updated, but you're not able to play single player or multiplayer at this time. Once it officially rolls out, you'll be able to do so. I hope that this helped at least shed some light on the things that are most important from the PTR patches. I hope that I saved you as much time as possible. I know these can be really lengthy. There's just so much to cover. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.